Hello, everybody. Welcome. I'm Jennifer LaRue. I'm the Director of Public Programs at the Mark Twain House and Museum here in Hartford, Connecticut. And oh my goodness, I'm so thrilled about tonight's program and so happy to see so many folks here, particularly people from Chicago, and I'm seeing all kinds of locations. So thank you so much for taking time to join us tonight. I'm not going to take up too much time talking. I know you're eager to hear the conversation between Djèlí and Vivian, but I do have a little bit of stuff to share with you. First of all, about Crowdcast. If you're new to Crowdcast, it's an awesome platform. We've been using it since last April. April 13th was our first Crowdcast 2020. And it's a lot of fun. And I see that you all have discovered one of the fun features, which is the chat. So please continue to chat throughout the program. It's, again, part of what makes it fun and helps create the sense of community that we so often lose when we're not in person in our auditorium, which we hope to be back to very soon. So pretend you're right there chatting with your friends. But the great thing is during the program in the auditorium, you can't talk during the program, but you can continue to talk during the program here and nobody will mind. However, at the end of the program, we are going to do a Q&A session. And if you have a question for Djèlí or Vivian, please put it in the area at the bottom of your screen that says ask a question. I'll be popping back on to help with that, and that makes things a lot easier to keep track of the questions. Another nice feature there is if you see that somebody already has asked the question that you had in mind, you can simply upvote it, and that'll move it to the top of the pile. So that's kind of fun too. So right above that Ask a Question section is another very important feature. You see the words, your support is vital to the Mark Twain House and Museum. Please donate here. We are really proud of the Mark Twain House and Museum of how our staff, we've all been furloughed a day a week. We've been without our major source of revenue, which is our guided house tour for most of the year, although we're thrilled that we've begun offering that again and have been selling out the past 2 weekends. But it has been a challenging year. And one of the things we're most proud of is that we've been able to stay connected with our community, with our audience, and to grow that audience with people all over the world through these programs. Which are mostly free, but you need to know that they're free to you, and we're glad to offer them for free, but they're not free for the Mark Twain House to produce. So I say this all by way of saying anything that you might manage to share with us in the way of a donation would be greatly appreciated and put to very good use. And on behalf of the staff and the Board of Trustees of the Mark Twain House and Museum, I want to let you know that we do appreciate anything you can share. And I'm sorry that I neglected to update our little donation button. It's actually the case that if you were to donate tonight, the Birdies for Charity program through the Travelers Golf Championship will add 15% to what you donate. So during the program, I will update that link to ensure that anything you donate is funneled through that program. I'm sorry that I didn't do that before. Now, another great thing. Tonight you have the opportunity, there's a link in the chat, and we will place it up so it's prominent throughout, to purchase a signed copy of Ring Shot, Djèlí Clark's new book that we'll be talking about tonight. We know that you can buy that elsewhere, obviously, but the advantages of purchasing through the Mark Twain House tonight are, first of all, that you do get a signed copy, and second, that you'll be supporting the Mark Twain House and Museum through your purchase. Speaking of support, I do want to say that tonight's program is sponsored by the Wish You Well Foundation and Connecticut Public WNPR, and the program is produced in part with support honoring the legacy of Frank Lord. So thank you for that to our supporters and sponsors. We have tons and tons of upcoming programs. I'm not going to list them here. We have about 3 a week for the next couple of months, every Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday, something to do. So keep an eye on that. Please just visit us at marktwainhouse.org to check in on what we have coming up. So one of the wonderful things about the Mark Twain House is it's a writer's home and a home for writers. And we've brought in writers from all over the country, all over the world in the past year or so to talk about their books and talk with other people about writing and so forth. One of the wonderful things, though, is that right here in Hartford, Connecticut, we are surrounded by wonderful writers, including tonight's guests. And I'd like to introduce them now. Vivian Nabeta is a creative spirit who fell in love with the arts at a young age. Her professional background is a mix of arts and cultural administration, marketing, audience development, and event management. She began her professional career at Hartford Stage, the Amistad Center for Arts and Culture, which is where I first knew of her, and then the Harriet Beecher Stowe Center, where we were colleagues across the lawn for some time. She now serves as the Director of Marketing and PR at Capital Community College in Hartford, and she serves on a number of boards and does a lot of great work. So we're thrilled to have her here tonight to talk with Djèlí Clark, who, I'm sorry I'm losing him. He's the award-winning and Hugo, Nebula, Sturgeon, and World Fantasy nominated author of the novellas The Black God's Drums and The Haunting of Tramcar 015. His stories have appeared in online venues such as Tor.com, Daily Science Fiction, Heroic, Fantasy Quarterly, Apex, Lightspeed, Fireside Fiction, and many others, including a number of anthologies. He's a founding member of the, I don't know how to say this, you're going to have to help me, Djèlí, Fiyah, F-I-Y-A-H, literary magazine, and reviews at Strange Horizons. So you can visit his site at www.pdjelyclark to find out more. And I'm going to stop talking about the two of them because I know that you're anxious to actually hear them talk rather than me. So I'd like to invite Djèlí Clark and Vivian Nabeta up on the screen to chat with us. Welcome, both of you. Thank you for being here with us this evening.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
I don't want to you.
Well, Vivian, I look forward to hearing your conversation, and will you let me know when it's time for me to pop back on and help with the questions, please?
Absolutely, I will.
All right, thank you. Well, I'm going to sit back and enjoy and have a great conversation. Thank you.
All right, thank you. So it's you and I now.
Yep, just us.
Yeah, so what we talked about, we had a little pre-discussion before, and one of the things I wanted to say before we got the show started, I just wanted to take a moment to acknowledge some of the indigenous tribes that are here in the area prior to the start of the program. I did a little legwork. I know it's not extensive, but I want to take a moment to acknowledge the Pequannock tribes, the Podunk tribes, and other tribes in the area, Native American tribes whose land we are on. So I just want to take a moment to acknowledge their presence here in America before it was America.
Everybody hear that feedback?
Yeah, just a bit. Yep.
Okay, so that means, it's sorry to pop back here, but that means that somebody has Crowdcast open in more than one place on more than one tab, and we're getting feedback. So if you could please double check. I'm going to mute you. Well, I'm not, because we need to figure this out. If you could just close all your tabs other than the Crowdcast that we're in right now, that would be awesome. Okay. Can each of you just say a word or two so I make sure that we're all good?
There we go.
There we go.
Okay, very good. Thank you.
Right.
I'm going to pop back off.
I think I found one open.
All right. The Haints were trying to get us today, and it's not going to work. Always. Not going to work. So in honor of today, they're not quite Haint blue, but I did wear a nice pair of earrings here for you in the shade of blue.
Yeah, I have my Shango bracelet. Also to make sure, right?
Absolutely. We always have to keep the ancestors with us, right? I have to tell you before starting, and I'm actually not saying this because I'm doing this program, when I put this on Facebook and I said I was doing this, I had quite a few people come out of the woodwork or text me and say, oh, I love that book. I read this book. You're doing this? I'm excited. So I see some of the folks here today. I won't name anybody, but a lot of folks are glad to be able to talk to you and hear more about the book.
I'm glad to be here. The Mark Twain house is right down the street, and I pass it up a lot. So,
well, see, there you go.
Finally, be able to interact.
Well, I hope one of these days, if you have not already, you should consider taking a tour. Yeah. I think they might make an exception for you and allow you in. One of the things that I think for me, what I was really thinking about, or as we were starting to as I was starting to think about how this talk would go and what kind of discussions we were going to have, and talking with a friend of mine, it was actually very interesting for us that you have a pen name that you use.
Yeah.
And you also, and so this talk is coming at the Mark Twain House, and Mark Twain himself is also not Mark Twain, but he is Mark Twain. So
Right.
I just was interested in finding out where the pen name came from, why a pen name, and just interested in exploring that before we dig into the meat of the book.
Yeah. I think I have a lot of reasons for a pen name. I think part of it came from, maybe it was my love of hip hop. Every MC or something would have like a different name. So
Absolutely.
I had alter ego. And so I wanted one as well. And I think I played around with a few. And I finally settled on the one I have. But another reason was I'm also an academic.
Mm-hmm.
In that I wasn't, even though I didn't have my PhD yet when I first started writing and publishing, I knew one day I would, and I didn't want to get the two confused. When I was a kid, I used to read C.S. Lewis a lot.
Oh, did you? Okay.
And I read all his books like in one term. I just read them all. Then I went looking for more. And I went to the library and I was like, a Catholic compendium, because I had no idea he was also a theologian. And so I said, you know what? I don't want anybody that happened to me, they run across my historical books. And so I said, I'll put it under a pen name, the creative speculative fiction writing, and I'll publish the other one. It was also a way of helping me keep the worlds not fully separate, but at least in their places so that I could function. And I ended up with a name that drew on my grandfather's first name. They don't make names like Fenderson anymore.
They do not.
Those are old British names that were popular in the Caribbean. My grandfather was from a small island called Caracu off Grenada. And my last name, and that was on my father's side. So my last name was my mother's maiden name, Clark. And then I took the middle one because it had some phonetic similarities with my real middle name, and Djèlí also happens to be the name of a West African storyteller, the historic storytellers of parts of West Africa, especially Old Mali. So took that name.
All right.
All together. There you go.
Folks in the comments, I'll be quizzing you, so I hope y'all are taking notes.
Yeah, there's a quiz afterwards. So.
We didn't tell you that when we had you register. Mm-hmm. There's a quiz. Oh my God, I'm so, the good thing about this kind of, and I have my copy just so everyone knows, you might see me refer to it. You see all my little tabs here. I don't play. The interesting thing about your book and this work is that it made me, there's so many angles for me to think about as we start to explore it. And so I guess I'm going to start maybe a little more traditionally and ask you, where did the idea for Ring Shout? I know you've obviously been in the speculative fiction realm. You've written short stories and so many other things. So maybe just tell us where that came from.
There were a lot of origins for this. It was really one of these things. That one thing on Jeopardy, potpourri?
Yes.
Could be anything. That's how this story was. It was just this hodgepodge of all these things. And I wondered, could I put all these things together and make them a story? And I'm talking everything. This was, there were origins in reading ex-slave narratives. There were origins, of course, in watching and listening to the traditions of the Ring Shout. There are inspirations from one of my favorite books in childhood, Madeleine L'Engle's A Wrinkle in Time. There are other works as well that were, more recent works, everything from Toni Morrison and other things that were inspiration. Also inspiration were some UGK songs from down south. And
okay, I wasn't expecting to hear that.
The Formation video was like a huge inspiration while I was thinking about things. There are whole things in there that have come out of that video, right? And so there are all these things I kind of threw together into one to make, this story in the end. And so, like I said, I had no idea if this would work. When it worked.
I think all the people in here will tell you.
I looked at it and I said, yeah, okay, let's see what happens. And, it worked. So
Yeah, no, and I think for me, I was thinking about a lot of the things that your book made me think about, and there were a lot of different touch points and a lot of different ideas and a lot of different places. And I feel like now with books, with fiction, and obviously you are in the field much more than I am, but there is more of a place for books that kind of cross fiction and fact. And I think that is one of the things that is very that I'm seeing more of now. And I have a little bit of a theory and of why you see that, of what is this mix of the fantastical and history and Black storytelling. And some of it I think comes from if you look in publishing years and years prior, unfortunately, we didn't exist, right? And so when you think about when you think about a lot of the work that was produced, it's not because we didn't have authors who could create this work. There was just never an opportunity. So some of it feels like we're giving ourselves a place retroactively. Yeah. And then I think also when you blend fiction and fantasy, I think it allows you to tell the truth, or to tell real life in a way that's accessible, but also not accessible, if that makes sense.
No, definitely. Yeah.
And
no, I think okay.
No, I was saying, and I think it also it allows people into the different worlds in a way they wouldn't. There's some folks who are very strict. I only do nonfiction, or, I only do fantasy or sci-fi. So blending it also allows you to have a new audience. And I don't know if you have found that's the case, or at least maybe the breaking down the walls makes people feel more comfortable about exploring different types of books.
Yeah, it's really funny. I can't say that I sometimes consciously thought, okay, I'm going to do this and I'm going to imbue these things for those purposes, but definitely so, right? I think there's something about the art of storytelling that is probably, ancient, in other words.
Yes.
When people came, you could tell them the story straightforward, or you could embellish it. You could really tell it, right? Somebody could. You probably have family members. I had family. My mother was great at this, right? Mm-hmm. When she came to tell a story, somebody else could just tell you the story, but my mother could tell you the story.
Yes,
right.
So, we can tell stories.
Like you were there. There was a way of embellishing the story and doing different things with it, where I knew that didn't happen, right? But that made the story more. And so I think there's a way that bringing the fantastic in does, I think, make it much more accessible to people in many ways. And, I also think I would say that, this isn't something new that I'm doing, especially you go back and you look at the history of Black writers, for instance, just in the United States. You go back to the late 19th century, the early 20th century, and you have figures like, I can't remember his first name right now, Chestnut. You have figures like Pauline Hopkins, who are using forms of horror. They're using forms of genre of horror. They're talking about using science fiction, using fantasy, and they're imbuing it with many of the contemporary issues that Black people are facing, right? And so they're talking about those things. But Chestnut has a story, I'm sorry, I'm just blanking right now, where literally a Black man is turned into a tree, and then they cut down the tree, and it's symbolic of lynching, right? But Hopkins is writing this story where a young Black man goes to Ethiopia and finds an ancient civilization where the people there are thousands of years old, and they use crystal technology. And she's writing this in 1900 something. Right?
Wow.
So there are these ways and she does it. She even says, I do this because I'm hoping this will combat white supremacy. Right. So she's telling you right there why she's doing it. Chestnut's story is very, very to the point of what he's doing. And so I think that, I always see myself as working in that tradition, and partly, I think it's coming from those books. I think it's my mother's love of Twilight Zone that we would watch all the time, where you would have these didactic, moments and political and social commentary within the fantastic. And I think there was a way that I know that always drew me in. So, I'm happy that it draws others in as well.
Absolutely. And I think there's also a way that, because it's also, we're in this moment, this exciting moment, which I feel is personally well overdue, where you're getting, because I'm a fan of science fiction, I'm a fan of horror, I call it scary stuff, but, and there weren't as many people who were brown or Black who were in that space, and you are seeing it so much more now. And the way you can tell stories and the amount of depth that you can get in, and it also finds a way to emphasize the tragedy sometimes of history, because you're looking at, if we're taking your book, this young woman essentially is on this hero mission to fight people who want to kill her. Yes, because of hatred. So, and so think about how that makes, and how when you juxtapose magic and reality, how sometimes it makes the reality even worse. Yeah. And it makes it that much more painful, but it also makes it that much more poignant. I'm sorry. That's not there's always words in English language that I'm not the best at saying. No, and that's one of them. But you get my point.
No, I get your point in many ways. And I think that's exactly it, right? I think, when I was growing up, certainly when I was younger and reading things, I would have to imagine the character. Yes. I imagine, like, don't let me hear somebody's brown or has a bit of curly hair. Oh, they Black. That's it.
Yeah. You're like, oh, they're tan. Oh, that's me. Okay. That's me. That's me.
I'm done. Right. And even certain books, like I'm thinking of Ursula Le Guin's Earthsea, where the characters were brown and Black on the inside. They kind of did this head fake where you thought maybe something was wrong with you because on the front cover they had white characters. Right. They whitewashed her own book. And so you were often looking for people who looked like you in these stories that you loved. And I think, we are living in, I don't want to call it a renaissance, but we are living in a moment where, like I always say, the work that I'm doing, it's not even that, like some people say, well, it's fresh and it's new. And I say, like, there are Black writers who've been doing this stuff. There are Black people who've been creating this kind of work. Right. It just never got to see the light of day.
Right.
And, I always think back about the fact that I was seeking to be published for like a long time. But I always think like the time when I first started writing and thinking about being published, Ring Shout would not have been published. The folks who maintained the gates and everything of the sort just wouldn't have been there for this story. They wouldn't have seen it as a story that could be sold.
Right. Who would want to read this? Who wants to read about slavery?
I don't think if it wasn't for the editor that I pitched this to, who happened to be a woman of color, Diana Foe at Tor, when she was at Tor, if she wasn't at that gate and the person who said, yeah, I'll greenlight that story, I don't know if it would be published. To be quite honest, I don't know if other people would have seen it. I mean, everyone now.
Right.
Go into that success, but I don't know if that was the case. And so we are living in an interesting moment where our stories are getting to be seen and our stories are getting to be heard. Absolutely. And it's bringing new perspectives. Right. And I think what we're getting at there is that we have stories to tell, and sometimes we're going to use those same tropes that everybody else says should be thrown away and you shouldn't do those anymore. We're going to use them because we're going to bring you brand new perspectives you hadn't thought of before.
Exactly.
Seeing us in these roles, seeing our faces in these roles, seeing these different identities in these roles is radical in itself at times.
Absolutely. And I loved your quote in the epilogue because, yes, everyone, I read the epilogue. Thank you. And I read all the way to the acknowledgments. But your quote about how stories don't always have to be these kind of adventure stories, fantastic stories don't have to be set in Middle Earth or Westeros, or even in Africa of ancient Africa. Like these stories exist here in America in a tangible way.
Yeah, and I definitely wanted, and by the way, I love all those places.
Yeah.
I love the fantasy in all those places, right? But in Ring Shout, I want to say, I grew up in Texas for much of my life, and I was like, I think a story can be set here. Why not?
Right.
Why not tell a fantasy story in these places? So what's stopping us from doing so? Yeah.
And when you think about the history of, kind of going backwards to the beginning of a land that existed prior to to occupation or however you like to refer to it, there are stories there. And people who are forcibly brought here, there are stories there. If you think about all of the locations and we don't know those stories, or we don't know somebody's interpretation of those stories, and it adds a depth to it that wouldn't have existed if only the winners had told it. And I use winners.
That's absolutely great. And by the way, there's some great work. If I don't have time to plug it, because I recently read it, Rebecca Roanhorse's Black Sun. If you want a story about a fantasy story based on indigenous cultures, check out Rebecca Roanhorse's Black Sun.
Oh, thank you. I'm making note. And so I want to talk about Maryse, who I'm absolutely in love with. She is she, well, I'm going to kind of ask maybe the traditional question. Is she based on someone you know? So yes, I actually do want to know that, but I'm also interested in kind of going in deep with her character, because for me, she was, I thought of, when I was reading the story, I thought of a few things. One of them was Buffy, the Vampire Slayer. So this time, she's
a lot of Buffy in here.
Yeah, I was like, I'm seeing Buffy.
Throw that into the potpourri or the potluck, if you want to call it, or the gumbo. There's some Buffy is all over this.
We're right here. I see you. We're right here. So I was seeing Buffy. It also made me think about just YA as a genre and the way it's blown up, because in my day, we only had a handful of young adult books, and only a handful of authors.
And you've seen the libraries lately? How many there are?
Listen, I'm like, let me make my list. And these are the books that I would have wanted to read when I was at that age. Exactly. And so I was thinking of that genre as well, because it's one of the few where young women, and particularly Black and brown young women, are at the center. Right. And it was so powerful to see this young woman who had gone through so much, and we'll talk about the end a little bit later, who had gone through so much, kind of come out the way she did. So I just wanted you to give me, where did she come from? Who is she?
I mean, and I'll say this for Maryse and all of the characters, the main characters, Maryse, Chef, and of course, Sadie. I think all of these characters in some ways, you always think back like where did I pull these from? It's often a retroactive thing. And I think some of them came from writings. Like I'm certain that some of my writings of Sadie, for instance, I know came from Zora Neale Hurston when I think back about some of her works. In fact, I know that it comes from Black women writers that I've read, and I'm kind of interpreting that. But it also came from people I know. Right. I kind of threw a little bit of them, and people who I do know personally will say, hey, were you talking about so-and-so? And I was like, yeah, kind of. But it's kind of like this amalgamation of various things. And plus, with any character, at the end of the day, you're always shaping that character. So Maryse was like, when I first started Ring Shout, the idea of it, but the very idea of it, I had Maryse in mind and the sword. Like I knew that she was a character. I didn't fully understand her personality. I didn't fully understand her motives. She wasn't fully fleshed out, but I could see the outlines of what she would become. All right. And then I think I simply drew on various different, like I said, from these different places to create her. And I wanted to create a character that was, on the one hand, strong, but I didn't want to leave it to be, oh, she's a strong character. That's like not, that wasn't enough. Right. I needed a character who also is complicated, who at times you get frustrated with because she does certain things. Like there's something she did, this one confrontation she does that's kind of brash in the book.
I think I'm guessing.
She was like, I don't like her for that. Right? Like, why did she do I said, that's real, right? She has this character who is complicated is what I want. I didn't want to make her a perfect character. I wanted to make her one that people could relate to, a human character where, it's something you may not want them to do, but you can see why they do it. And you follow them along, but at the end, you still feel and connect with them. And so that's what I really wanted people to get from the characters. And I'm always happy to hear that people do. And a lot of people connected with both her and the other two main characters, right? And that's why I'm really happy there that I managed to get them.
Good. And it's also probably a challenge for you as a man writing for a woman.
Right.
Yeah, I know.
Did I do that right? Did I?
Like, did I say that? You also, when you were talking, you made me think about something. You said something similar to actually what Issa Rae says when she gets there's a lot. If you watch Insecure, you know that the fandom is intense, and they're intense now because they're waiting for the episodes. And she says,
I just remember the last season of Insecure, how it ended.
Listen,
that was art. The way they revealed everything at the end, that was art. My jaw was dropping. I was like, what?
And we won't spoil it for you, audience, if you haven't seen it. But and the last season's coming, and she talks about how she does this. She's like, I don't write. Nobody wants to watch people be perfect and make the right decisions. And making mistakes is part of that. And so that's how you connect with me, because you see yourself. And I think that that's where that intensity comes from. Right. And when you see yourself, because there were parts of myself that when I was reading, I was like, oh yeah, that felt like me. That felt like me. Maybe not exactly me, because I'm not carrying a sword. But I definitely felt that. I think also with her, it felt like, I don't want to say, I'm more familiar with Lord of the Rings in terms of the movies than it is the books. Mm-hmm. It wasn't quite, I wouldn't say it's like a Frodo journey, because that doesn't feel quite right. And it doesn't feel like a Sam journey either, but it was somewhere in between the two, because let's be honest, Sam would not, I mean, if it wasn't for Sam, Frodo, like,
it wouldn't work.
Everybody would be
carried the ring. He would have taken the ring.
Like, I guess all of us are gonna die. But it felt like it felt like that heroic moment where she had to find out who she was. Right. And to your point about not being perfect, if she did everything right from the beginning to end, you're like, okay, well, why am I reading this? Yeah, exactly. No, you're right. She's a character who. And, and she develops as I'm writing her. Like, there were certain things I didn't know I would create with her. And, as I'm writing, she comes along. And I think a lot of that was especially helpful for me was the beginning, that dialogue with them on the rooftop. I think that's when I really started fleshing out, okay, this is how these characters are going to interact with each other. I remember I thought at first, like, oh, this is still too long. We're just standing here on the rooftop talking. And I asked my editor, like, should I cut that down? She was like, no, that's perfect. Like, let them talk. That's great. They're having good conversations. And she said she felt when I was done reading that I could understand the motivations of these characters. And so, I tried to do that in the very beginning. And I think writing that really helped me shape how she interacts with the others, how she sees herself, right? That she, the way that she is focused on she's driven on what she's doing, but you realize later it's based on this trauma that she won't confront, right? And so, where would our heroes be without their childhood traumas, right? Yeah, where would we be, right? And that's part of it, right? We all come with that in different ways, of course, but we all come with these things and we bring them along with us, Yes. And so I really wanted her as a character who you cheer for, but she even understands, like, I'm a little messed up. Yeah. And she's also like, there's moments she's like, okay, I'm in over my head right now. Yeah. This is really above me now. I don't know what I'm doing, but I guess I have to just figure it out. I gotta do it. And that's what a hero is, right? A heroine is, right? The person who I don't know, but I'm going to keep trying. Exactly. And I can't do it by myself at the end of the day. I have to rely on the people around me. Yeah. Exactly. And so that's actually a good maybe segue to start talking a little bit about some of the other characters. I'm trying to toe the line between talking about the plot. I'm sure, and I know you are doing it too because not everybody here has read the book. So there's certain moments we don't want to spoil for you. I know I found that I also had a particular connection with Chef. Yeah. And I was thinking about some of the characters I'd love to hear from again. And Chef is one that if you ever decide that you want to do, you know, a prequel, a novella, a something, she's definitely one that I would want to hear about. Because I love the fact, and going again, talking about adding layers to storytelling when you open up who is allowed to tell stories broadly. It references the fact that she went overseas to go to war.
Yeah.
And she was a Black woman. And she was doing this at a time where her country was still not treating her so well, understatement. And that was fast. So did you, is this one of those decisions you kind of made later on about her backstory, or was it already there?
No, her backstory, I knew that I wanted to have a Harlem Hellfighter in here. And partly it has to do with what you're talking about, the era that it's in. Like when I first pitched this story, in fact, it was supposed to happen during the Red Summer of 1919. You know, during those massive anti-Black riots that roiled the United States, where many of these riots were based on African-American soldiers returning from World War I, where they had gone to fight in the hopes that it would show their patriotism and show that they belonged. And yet the very sight of a Black soldier in uniform incensed whites so much that they would attack them, right? They literally in Georgia, one Black man who refused to stop wearing his uniform was lynched, right? And so there was this, because what they saw here were these Black men, Black people in general, trying to basically usurp, as they saw, the rights of citizenship, right? And to be a veteran, to be a member of the armed forces was something that should only be reserved for white men, right? And so these Black men were attacked for this. And so this went on, but at the same time, it was many of these former soldiers who armed themselves and protected their neighborhoods from various attacks, right? And so while these white mobs were attacking Black neighborhoods and, you know, maiming and killing Black people, you had these men who had used their former military training to guard the homes, right? And guard different places. And Rosa Parks herself recalls members of her family doing this, right? And basically keeping their arms by them. And so I ended up pushing the book a little further for a whole lot of historical reasons. I pushed it to 1922, but because it was 1919 and because of World War I and that history, I always knew I wanted a Harlem Hellfighter in there. And I always knew that I wanted to be a woman. And I remember somebody was like, well, can you do that? Because there weren't women in the armed forces. I was like, hey, I got monsters in here and everything else. I can do whatever I want.
Exactly.
Right? I
It's
just have to bring the audience along with me. And there are long histories of women entering the armed forces and dressing as men and so forth to do so. So it's not a history that's unknown. None of it is unfeasible. And so, you know, I knew that I wanted her there. And she brings an interesting perspective, like her political philosophies, right? That she gets into it with this other more radical figure, right? And these radical figures, like she has this perspective that was a Black perspective at the time, right? Where Black people were trying to figure out, how do we exist in this world? And some wanted Black nationalism, some wanted socialism, and some, like Chef, were like, I'm going to do my route, right? And I'll try to figure it this way. And so I wanted her as a character there who expressed that viewpoint. Like, you don't always agree with it or with her, but you still admire her as a character.
Perfect. And I know I want to keep my eye on time too. I want to make sure folks get a chance to ask questions. And if you have not, I just want to remind people that there is a spot in the chat box to ask questions and they will be collected. So if you are thinking of something, please go right ahead and we will make as much time to answer questions as we can. Another character, obviously, we can't not talk about Nana Jean, who is, to me, the matriarch of the novel. Again, I'm in honor of her, not quite Hank Blue, but a little bit.
Close enough, yeah.
Close enough. And I'm sure you had to really do, because it wasn't, you were very specific about where she came from.
Yeah.
That she was Gullah and that her dialect reflected that. Can you walk us through a little bit? Was that also a character that you're like, yes, she has to be this specific, or as you were doing research and thinking, you're like, you homed in on her more?
I think I always knew that she was going to be Gullah. In fact, I had to figure out ways how to make this work. I said it in Macon, but that's not a strong Gullah cultural stronghold. So you see, you do that with stories. You try to like, okay, well, how do I do this? But I always knew that I wanted her as a character. Again, inspirations, Julie Dash's Daughters of the Dust, right? These kind of inspirations, but as well as inspirations on the Ring Shout and inspirations of inspirations from interviews that have been done with various Gullah and Geechee people and people who recorded their songs and everything else. So I knew I wanted this in here to speak of root magic and these different things. And there was there's so many similarities to my own family from the Caribbean with, bush tea and all these different things that are really similar that were inspirational for me when I was, thinking of her as a character, and this character who is both a matriarch, as he says, but also brings in this magical element, this alternate magical element to the the magic of hate and so forth that also permeates the book, right? She's that opposite side. And I thought, why not make her a bootlegger?
Because why not? Why not?
This old woman is a bootlegger, but yeah, it's always the joke, right? It's the one you don't expect. It's like, of course she's running it, yeah, but she has her own use for it, right? And like the idea that the rum might protect against evil. I mean, that you can find that in Southern, in Black Southern American folklore. You can find that throughout the Black diaspora.
Oh, let me tell you, we all have a cure for something.
Everybody got it, right? There's this thing called Florida water, for instance, that's big in parts of the Caribbean, here in the American South and everywhere. Yeah, like Florida water is magic and can do everything. And so, I thought of like how all of these various cultures are, have these similarities in sense of things like rum and these other things as having these potent properties, right? That you bless things with, that you use for sacred uses, but that you also imbibe for your own, pleasure and inebriation. And so I tried to mold the two. And so, yeah, she was a character that kind of held the rest together.
Yeah, and it wouldn't have ended the way it did if it wasn't ultimate for her.
Don't want to give it away, but yeah.
I won't. I didn't say. I'm not saying too much.
Character in this, of course, yeah.
What was it? You said something to the effect of your line was, "Don't underestimate the stubbornness of old folks." Yeah, exactly. And very true.
I wanted to put that in there, right? Like, as much as these are youthful characters, I want to pay homage to these older figures who are fonts of wisdom and everything else. Yeah.
Yeah, and I don't have anything to back this up, but I do notice that a lot of times when you are reading books by maybe authors of color or whether it's film or other kind of cultural material, we tend to have an elder or an ancestor that tends to be a theme. Even if there's a really young person, that young person has a grandmother or a figure, usually a woman, who guides them or who helps advise them to get them where they are.
Right. And yeah.
It's always of interest.
You're absolutely right. That's always there. They bring them together. I'm thinking of Toni Morrison, the women who come together to, in Beloved to finally help get rid of the spirit haunting her. Right. So there's always this notion of these older women coming together and having this strength and power. So yeah.
Yeah, well, when you get older, you see some things, and you learn how to make them work or not work, right?
And and everybody young knows who not to talk back to, right? You know that very well. I needed Namzine to be no nonsense.
Yes, and the auntie you don't say anything but hi and bye to, or the mean.
I had the aunties as well.
Yes, notice what I did there. Thank you for picking up on that. And there were three of them.
There were three.
And they didn't, when I was reading it, for some reason I was thinking about a Greek chorus, even though they weren't technically what a Greek chorus
would be. It's that Hercules cartoon. That had In Vogue as the chorus. Right?
Okay.
But no, you're right. Yeah, I could see that like a Greek chorus.
I was thinking that. I was like, and then kind of they're talking to you, not in riddles. Yeah. And then, so I just kept thinking about them. So at least I'm somewhat close to that. I'm somewhat close to that.
Yeah, they definitely are. otherworldly aunties.
Yes, otherworldly aunties, and they come in threes. And then I guess we'll do one more. I'll bring up one more thing because I know we're getting close, and I want to make sure we get in for Q&A. That we have to talk about the elephant in the room in terms of the book, which is Birth of a Nation.
Yeah.
And Birth of a Nation is a real, for those of you who don't know, it is actually a real film. I don't myself have the stomach to watch it. I've never seen it.
Yeah.
Maybe at some point in my life I will. I just cannot do it. At least not right now. And so Birth of a Nation. So again, that melding of the real and the fantasy, that using a real film that to say it's controversial is an understatement. I have lots of words and I won't use them today, but to bring that together as the meeting point, because I'm trying to not spoil it for the folks who haven't read the book, right. But the way that the film is used as a centerpiece for racism and the things that are happening in the story. Do you want to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, sure. So I have seen Birth of a Nation a lot. I actually teach a class called Slavery in Film. And what I do is I teach it chronologically to show how slavery has been depicted in film. And so we start with Birth of a Nation because it's one of the earliest films. It's considered the progenitor of modern cinema, and it's still taught in film class. It also is perhaps the most racist film in history. To put it bluntly, the Ku Klux Klan members are the heroes of this film. And it tells a very bizarre, alternate, and false mythic version of both slavery, the end of slavery, and Reconstruction, especially making the first Klan heroes rather than vigilante terrorists who murdered and terrorized people. They give them an out and say they did it for a noble reason, but it's nonsense. You know, and Birth of a Nation was not only important because of its role in the history of cinema, but Birth of a Nation, when it came out, was a phenomenon. Right? It's shown to members of Congress. It's shown to members of the Supreme Court. It's shown in the White House, right? White moviegoers go and see this movie, and they are amazed. They're almost entranced and enthralled by this movie. They faint and swoon. They wear Klan outfits and like pennants and cheer on the Klan. In Florida, one white man watching this sees this Black character who's really a white man in blackface chasing this young white girl to sexually assault her, and he pulls out a gun, reportedly, at least according to this newspaper we have, and he shoots at the screen, right? And he's that swept up by this. And there's something there when I teach the class, we talk about the impact of communication. We talked about the impact of mass media and how media can both manipulate, but you also bring your own biases to media, right? And so we have these debates over this thing. And so Birth of a Nation is a perfect film to talk about that because much as I use it in the book almost as a type of, I'll be quite cliche, movie magic, it did seem to throw this spell over people, right? Where it became this massive film where, W.B. Du Bois believed that that there were anti-Black riots and Black people died over this film. And we know that one of its most famous legacies is that Birth of a Nation is probably more than anything responsible for the birth of the second Klan. Right. It is a fan of the film, Al Simmons, who sees Birth of a Nation and decides to go to Stone Mountain in Georgia and create the second Klan. And he creates the second Klan based greatly on the Klan from the movies. Right. Their rituals, the way they dress is based a lot on that. And this Klan is massive, right? This Klan will have chapters throughout the U.S. as far as Seattle and, New York. It will boast in the end some 4 million members. It runs people for office. This is a massive Klan at its massive height, much different than even the first Klan after the Civil War. And so all of this was swirling around. I knew that all of this was part of the time period I was talking about. It's there in these anti-Black riots that happened in 1919. It's there in Tulsa. It's there in all of these different things. And so I think I always knew that Birth of a Nation was going to be a part of this because I've unfortunately had to watch it many, many times. And I've had to read many articles of Black activists who fought against it. some of their white allies, their white and Jewish allies who helped them fight against it, but as well as the amount of people who love that movie, right? People like a young Margaret Garner who would go on to write her own version of it called Gone with the Wind later on, right? And so that movie had this powerful impact on white America, almost like
its spell. It was a spell, right?
And,
it was magic, and it was magic.
Go down that road to talk about magic.
Yeah, absolutely.
And in pulling on that, I could also tie that back to the first Klan, which I had, and it was through reading the ex-slave narratives of these were formerly enslaved people who were having their interviews taken in the 1920s and 30s that I first glimpsed ideas of the Ku Klux Klan as monsters, because it was these ex-slaves talking about the first Klan at the end of the Civil War. Who would point out that many of these Klan members wore horns, they would wear different things on their bodies or tails to look monstrous. And there was this notion of them, like you were saying in the beginning, telling the story of this trauma and terror you faced from this first Klan, but using folklore and thinking of them as supernatural, calling them haints and creatures and so forth. And so I kind of took those two, both the history of Birth of a Nation as well as the earlier histories of the first Klan as told by these former ex-slaves, and kind of gave me a lot of the setting for this world.
Well, there you go. I think on that note, we do want to get to questions, and hopefully there'll be some answers for them. So Jennifer, look at right on cue. Right on cue, Jennifer. Thank you.
Wow. Well, thank you. Oh, what a fascinating conversation. Thank you both so much. And I'm going to invoke host privilege and ask a question first before the questions from our audience, because I was struck throughout your conversation, and it was a very lovely, interactive, engaging conversation. This is not light stuff. The subject matter is not light, but you two were so full of, I don't know, enthusiasm, and there's a joy that comes across. And I just, that leads me, because we're interested in writing and writers. Djèlí, can you talk about the writing process and was it a joyful experience for you? I mean, it sounds like you had fun pulling together all these disparate elements and putting them together. Can you talk about that at all, please?
Yeah. I mean, it's really interesting because I've written similar. I don't know if I've written anything exactly like I said. Ring Shot was its own thing, but part of it is in what I do that I'm a historian of slavery and emancipation. So I read quite a lot of different traumatic events, right? And I'd always been interested in the quote unquote nadir that they often call this period in African American history of anti-Black race riots and lynchings and so forth. And so I'd always had an interest in those things. And so in putting these together, I have to say that what I tried to do, because I knew I was going to be talking about traumatic events, I knew I was going to be talking about things that were hard, right? Things that were, like you said, were heavy. There were heavy topics in there. But I also wanted to show that while this was going on, people were also living their lives, right? So I had the juke joint scene, I have people, there are people having their own fighting and fussing and everything else, right? There are people making love. All of this is going on because people are still living their lives in the middle of all these horrors. So I wanted to make sure that I captured both of those. And it was this hard balance because I didn't want to lessen the trauma of the period. I didn't want to do things like say, well, racism is just caused by monsters, right? Try to make, no, that's not the point at all, right? I made certain there to say that no, human beings are making these choices, right? The monsters are just part of this. And so it was just, I don't know if it was joy as I was writing it, but I was kind of determined to get these voices down. And I guess that comes from the historian part of me who is often looking at figures who, for instance, who were enslaved and may not have left behind records. No one came to take their notes down on their lives. And so all we have often are stories about them. And then you have to try to read between the lines and piece together their lives. And I figure that's a way to give them voice. And so I think in the story, I really want to give many of these Black people in here voices who you may not hear about and make them fully rounded characters. They don't have to be perfect. It's not human, right? They are simply, I wanted to make them just, again, fully well-rounded and fleshed out. And I think that that was a process that, again, I don't know if I fully call it joy, but it was something that I felt good about doing because I wanted people to read this and get those ideas, right? See these characters the way I saw them.
No, I love that. That was a great answer. Thank you. And now, audience, I will move to your questions. Jacqueline Davis says, I have not read the book, but I definitely plan to buy it. So thank you for that. It sounds like it's in the realm of Lovecraft County. Do you have an idea of where you want the story to go when you start writing, or do you let the characters take you along as the story unravels? Thanks for your question, Jacqueline.
I would say, first of all, certainly there are enough Lovecraftian themes in here, or as people would say, cosmic horror. And there's actually, and Lovecraft himself being a very problematic individual, right? A very blatant racist, not a man of his time. Beyond that, a very blatant racist, anti-Semite, everything you can think of. Lovecraft being, and yet he has this stamp on aspects of horror, right? And so I'm definitely tweaking some of those ideas and in some ways subverting some of those themes for this story. So definitely you'll see it in there, and there's a little quirky bit at the end, a little Easter egg there for anybody who gets my reference to Lovecraft himself. But getting to the part about writing, I'm not a pantser. I'm not the person who can just, there's a blank page, and I'm just going to start writing. No, that's work for me. I have outlines. But by the time I write the outline, I've probably been thinking about the story for months. And so a ring shout, I remember when I was thinking about ring shout heavily, I was living in Washington, D.C., and I had a fellowship in the middle of Pennsylvania, a place called Indiana, Pennsylvania. And I would make this trip that was like, I think it was like 6-7 hours back and forth through mountains. And while I was driving, I would play several of these ring shout songs. And I would just be thinking about Beyonce's Formation, about something else. I'd be thinking about all these images. And, if I did a stop at a rest stop or something, I would jot down some notes. And so by the time I was ready to write the story, I had a fully fleshed out outline. At the same time, I can go back and look at that outline. I can tell you that the eventual story took all kinds of meandering turns because the characters and the plot are going to go the way it wants to go, no matter how well you sit down and write the outline. So, and I try not to be slavish to it. Right? I say, like, look, let's see what's going to happen. And so on the one hand, I had an outline, but on the other hand, I can tell you Sadie, for instance, was not in the outline. Was not the first outline, but she sure entered there as a character that I loved, right? So, you have to be open to those changes as you write, for me anyway. Yeah.
And that's one of the best kind of explanations as to how to reconcile the contrast is planner versus pantser. And you say
right.
a planner, but that's a good hybrid of the two. So thank you for that.
That's a good word. I'm a hybrid of the two. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for this great talk. Does your research and writing process change when you're working on speculative fiction set in the U.S. versus your stories taking place in Cairo, says Kara?
In some ways, certainly, because I'm much more acquainted with U.S. culture, I feel more at ease in understanding it, like with doing ring shout, for instance. First of all, I study this history, I teach on it, and so a lot of it is at my disposal. I know where to look. I understand certain aspects of folklore, dialect, and so forth. It was different. It's different when I'm writing in Cairo, when it's a culture that I visited, but I don't live there. Visiting someplace and living there, two different beasts entirely, right? And so that takes just a lot more immersion. A lot more listening, a lot more paying attention to things, a lot more, for the larger novel, for instance, I had the help of people who were versed in medieval Middle Eastern folklore and others who better understood Egyptian Arabic, for instance, as opposed to, the forms of Arabic, but Egyptian Arabic itself, or aspects of how people might live in Cairo versus Alexandria, right? So I needed those kinds of things that aren't things that I know and have those lived experiences with. I needed people who had those lived experiences to help me out in those ways. And so, so it's just a different thing. I mean, some of the basic tools are there, but it is different when you're writing about a place that, again, you are in many ways an outsider. You have to just be a lot more careful and pay attention to details.
It's almost like being a reporter and or a journalist, and then turning it into a work of fiction. It seems like. So a number of people want to know, where do you teach? Everybody wants to take your class. So
I'm a Husky, so I'm
yeah,
right
Huskies.
Yep, I'm right at stores. Yeah.
Okay, awesome. And how are things going with the? I'm always struck by you authors whose books have come out during this COVID time, and I'm sure you wrote this before COVID. And so, what's that experience been like for you?
Yeah, the publishing experience. I mean, it's been an interesting time for writing, for having work released when it did. Ring Shout was fortunately released. Ring Shout was released, I think, was just released when things were getting. We didn't know exactly where things would go. So it was released at least a good time, I think, because I knew other authors who books were released within the pandemic, and that was challenging. Couldn't go to book signings, couldn't go all of these things. And I couldn't go to many book signings either. But, at the least, I think I was able to, at least people knew that the work was coming out and those things. So it made it a little easier. And so it's been an interesting experience. I don't think that I've gotten, people say, well, you're at home, you get a lot of writing done. I think some people have, and it's a lot different being at home. I have twin toddlers, if you didn't hear them.
Oh, boy.
So doing all of that family life, and, I also have another writing job as an academic. So, I was happy when Ring Shot came out that it did well, because it gave me a breather of having to create other things. People could focus on this because it has been hard to create. And so we'll see how things go moving forward.
Well, we're absolutely delighted to have you here this evening. Thank you both for sharing that conversation with us. And I've just been hanging on every word. So, and Vivian has obviously been to the Mark Twain house.
Maybe once, maybe that one time.
But Djèlí, I'd like to have you come and take a tour with us. It's usually one of the things we do when we have authors in person, and we even give them a Mark Twain bobblehead doll. And so we will get this to you when you come visit us in person as soon as that's possible. And again, we've opened back up, so hopefully, fingers crossed, that won't be too much longer. So thank you for joining us this evening. And folks, thank you for being here. Thanks for your good questions. Thank you for purchasing copies of this wonderful book, Ring Shout. And please join us again soon. Well done, Vivian.
Thank you. You have my agent. My agent would love that you have the book, because I never have it.
And Vivian, you're absolutely the perfect person. Thank you so much. You did a great job.
Thank you. Those were great questions.
Appreciate it.
It was a great conversation.
Thank you.
So let's do it again.
I'll wait for that list of inspirations. I was making note every time you said an inspiration.
Okay. Yeah. There's so many. So you can go listen to some UGK, watch Beyonce's Formation video, read Wrinkle in Time. It'll all come together.
Sounds great. Well, and see what we come up with after we
watch some Buffy.
Right? There you go.
I think it's the episode called I think it's called Hush.
Hush.
Watch Hush. Look, everybody knows that episode. Watch
it. Just gave me a shiver just when I thought about it.
Came from African American folklore, but Hush was a great inspiration in translating them.
Good to know. Well, thank you both so much, and go and enjoy the rest of your evenings and put your toddlers to bed.
They're in bed. Luckily,
we'll see you again soon. Thank you.
Bye, everybody. Bye.
Bye, Vivian.